This is the story of Takeru Tenkuji, a boy looking to walk the path of the ghost hunter just like his late father before him. On his 18th birthday, he was mercilessly slain by monsters known as Gamma. Now given a second chance at life, he only has to do one thing: collect the 15 heroic icons and make a wish on the Great Eye to give him back his life. The only problem? He only has 99 days to do it. And this is his story, as seen by the one and the only, Triple the G.O.D. Was y'all feeling that? Cause I was feeling that. I was all deep voiced and all narratively, like narrative voice, like da 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 da. No, seriously. Hey, yo, what's up? You know who it is. It's the one and the only, the Triple the G.O.D. And I'd like to welcome you guys back to another installment of Triple the God Speaks on. Yo, we about to get into this Kamen Rider Ghost, man, with XA so around the corner. It's like I feel that it's time that, that I get my thoughts out there, but understanding with an underline that this is more of like a check minus review, because even as I'm talking about the TV show, we don't have all the facts about this show at all. We still got the Spectre movie coming, and we still got Ghost Cross X8 and all the stuff that hasn't been subbed, that a lot of people haven't interacted with or watched, and I don't read wikis like that, so that's not how I get down. So like I said, this is like a check-minded review, more about the show and what we know with the puzzle pieces we have versus a full thing of what Ghost is all about, because there are still unanswered questions and things like that, and we'll get into all of that. But right now, what I want to do is, I understand that it just makes sense that we start from the beginning. And we're not talking about the beginning of the show. We're talking about Ghost's origins, period. Because where that starts is a rumor I remember hearing a couple years ago. And I remember hearing it in between, when Wizard was about to become Gaim. And I remember hearing a rumor about a rider named Kamen Rider Boogie that was a man that existed on both sides of the planes of life and death. And what his job was, he was kind of like an exorcist, where he would go around and he would help people who haven't passed on yet, and to help them solve their problems, whoop ass doing so, help them pass on, and some of them would leave behind their souls for him to absorb into CDs, and he would use them in his transformation device and his weapons or what have you. When you think about what Ghost ultimately became based off of that rumor, even though I don't really remember the basis of the rumor, I don't know whether that came from the depths of the internet or whatever, or that was actually something. It's interesting to see how much of that rumor ultimately became what it was when Kamen Rider Ghost became to be. So it's it was interesting to really think about that. The other thing is, I remember hearing about what Ghost was initially supposed to be. That Ghost was supposed to be, for my remembrance, it was a world travel show where the main rider was an archaeologist, and he was traveling all around the world to dig up these historical artifacts or whatever, and those historical artifacts would be his transformation devices and things like that. And you sit up here and you wonder, could you really have made a show about a dude who uses music as a weapon like Revolution X, or a rider who is an archaeologist? Well, the answer is yes, because again, we are talking about a show that is marketed to sell toys to kids, so that's all day. The thing is that you really wonder, and I sat here and wondered and thought about it, what kind of compelling stories could you really tell with a dude who lives on the precipice of life and death, helping people pass on, and then is a music-based rider who absorbs souls into CDs, or an archaeologist who is a world traveler with a couple of his homies using artifacts as transformation devices. It's as long as it was collectible and the rider belt was cool, as Ghost proved, is that you could. That is something you could most definitely do. Most definitely pull off. But see, the thing is, none of those things came to be. But there is one more piece, and this is where we gonna really start talking about Ghost at this point. Is my first interaction with Ghost was the episodes where he appeared in Drive. And it's like those episodes and when they are featured in movies are never the thing you go off of, because by the time you get to serialization of a show, things change. Like the dynamic of the characters change, because see, now you're writing plots for characters and not characters just saying hi, hello, let me slash a couple of things, let me show you what toy you finna get ready to die and I'm gonna peace out. But the thing that I remember like sticking out was that I honestly thought that Urison was going to play a bigger part in Ghost, that he was going to be the guy just rolling around like, yo, you need to do this. And initially, Urison was that. Urison was, to put it in video game terms, he was the tutorial text box in every video game that exists now. Or if I want to be throwback about it, he was the speaker box in Super Mario World that when you hit it, this is what you do, just in case to remind you. And Urison was that at the beginning. And it's like, as Takeru grew as a hero, he needed the tutorial text box less, which means the show needed Urison less for that reason, which is why he didn't play as much as a bigger part than he did like early on when Takeru was learning how to use his powers and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? And then it's like the same for Edith too, because it's like his whole thing was he was playing both sides of the game the whole show until he got found out. And I remember the way that he ultimately got found out. That was comedy right there. And that was in the instance where they found out the truth about him. Was there was comedy in the moment that was very serious. And it's like, and I think that's one of the things that Ghost really did right, is that because this was a show talking about a dead kid trying to win his life back by collecting heroic MacGuffins, was the show needed a lot of humor, and the humor was provided in a lot of places, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we talk about the characters, because we're gonna come back to Edith. We're going to come back to him at some point because we got to when we talk about characters. But I just wanted to get Urison out the way because there's really nothing else to really say about that character at all other than he was a tutorial text box. He brought some comedy when the comedy was needed. But after Takeru figured out how to use his powers and did it on his own, the show needed him less. So that was like a strange takeaway from like when we initially saw him when Urison was everywhere all the time. So with all of that being said, Kamen Rider Ghost, the show, episode 1 to episode 50. Let's talk about it. I will say this out front, because like I said, we're going to talk characters later. The characters that we are introduced to in episode 1 aren't the characters who bow out in episode 50. And if a show successfully gets the point across that growth has happened, then on a level the show has succeeded. Is that these characters went through an arc. They are not the same characters, not the same people that they were at the beginning, and that they're different, and that we should be able to learn to be able to point out those differences. And that's what a lot of this review is going to be about me pointing out the differences and how these characters have grown, because they did. And it's like, if the internet don't want to give them credit for it, your boy is. I'm going to give credit where credit is due, because again, like I said, the characters that we saw in episode 1 aren't the characters that bow out of the show at episode 50. But here's the thing now. There were, on my part, and I will admit this, when I initially sat down and I understood what the plot was and why Takeru had to collect the MacGuffins and all of that stuff, was that I had a misunderstanding of what the show ultimately was going to become. Is that, again, like I said, like I just talked about, I thought there was going to be a lot more Urison, and he was going to be the soul, that him and Edith were going to be the providers of the comic relief that the show needed, because it was carrying such a heavy subject. I was wrong about that, because you know why they brought comic relief when they were on screen and it needed to be them. that usually fell to other characters. We talk about mainly Onari, and we'll talk about him later, but a lot of the comic relief, like when you didn't have Edith or Urison on the screen, it usually Onari was bringing that comedic heat. He was bringing it, because again, like I said, because the show was carrying such a heavy premise, is that you need some kind of comedy to really balance out that you're talking about a dead kid trying to collect MacGuffins to win his life back. So you needed that. The thing was early on, because it's like when I think about Ghost, I can see Ghost in this hindsight of mine as two different TV shows that I watched, because the first leg of the show was like the first leg of the show, and everything up to the heel face turn of Alan. That's a show of Kamen Rider Ghost, and then what happened after that? That is a completely different television show, and I think the show knows that it's something completely different. That once Alan took the heel face turn, became a good guy, is that the show just droop. The show tanked at some point. Like the foundation that held the show up just disappeared. And we'll talk about that a bit later, but I want to lay the foundation of what we're going to get into. But like I said, though, that the first leg of the show that I believe up to when Takeru got Tokon Boost was, that was a show. That was a show that could have went. That show and that plot progression that you could have did all of that in 50 episodes. And you could have, that the way that the show was building up. But again, when you come to the first leg of the show, it's important to note and remember, and it's something that every now and then when I sit down and I watch Sentai, and I watch Kamen Rider, and hell, when I watch Power Rangers to a degree, is that I have to remember, this is a television show marketed to children to get them to buy toys, and I have to remember that. Because let me ask you a question: how many times did you see Captain Ghost and the Iguana Ghost Striker in that form where it's like the Iguana Ghost Striker and Captain Ghost fuse like that? You saw that like for the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then they never used it again, because one, it's probably expensive to use that type of CG, but they have a toy to sell. They did that every year. I remember when we can't even, I was going to talk about that show. We can't even talk about it, because talking about that show makes me mad. We just not even going to even get into, we're not even going to get into that, but it was a whole bunch of that early on when they were showing Drago or whatever, when he used to dive into see somebody's deep subconscious or whatever. It was that all the time, because they had a toy to sell. That's one of the real egregious things I remember, because they used that a whole lot to try to get that toy over. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. That first leg of the show was simply for him to collect the heroic icons and introduce Spectre as a toy and do all of that. That's what that was. If we're talking about it completely from a business standpoint, was show the bird that turns into a phone, show the spider that does something, and show that lantern, because we need to sell these toys. Get those heroic icons out there. You know what I'm saying? It's like, get all of that out there. Get Spectre out there. Show them. You know what I'm saying? Show all of that, because this is a show. We got to sell toys. But how did that affect the plot? I'm glad I asked myself that, to ask me that so I can answer it for you. When you think about how pushing the toys at that moment affected the plot, was we got Makoto and Spectre in episode 3, 4, something like that. Well, Takeru wasn't even Kamen Rider Ghost long before they introduced you a second rider. But in the story progression of the story that is trying to be told here, is that Takeru needed a rival at that time, because that dynamic of that leg of the show wouldn't have worked without an Spectre. It wouldn't have worked, because at that time you had Saionji over here collecting the heroic icons for whatever he was trying to do it for, and you had Alan over there in the corner drawing eyes all over the city, and it's like but I really appreciated like how mysterious that Alan was over there in the corner with Saionji. I appreciated the mystery behind those characters, and I appreciate that the show took time early on to really establish why it was a mystery. But then when it was like, yo, and it was like one of those oh shit moments, like, yo, that's who that is, and that's why this is, and the show really did that very well early on of trying to successfully build a world that you want to interact with and want to be a part of. This would fall apart later. That, like, later in the show, and I will be honest right here and right now, later in the show would fail to do this in a way that this is stuff, well, you pretty much, hinted at this whole time, but this is what it was now, and it's kind of like, well, okay, I'm going to roll my eyes at this because this is something y'all should have done like 10, 15 episodes ago. But, again, we still talking about the first leg of the show, though. Is, like I said, that first leg of the show wouldn't have worked without a Spectre-type character to be there to bounce off Takeru. It wouldn't have worked. Is that because, again, you had, at this point, you introduced Spectre. You got Spectre, you got Makoto, you got Kamen, who's an icon, and it's like, his whole thing is, I want to wish for my sister to come back to life if I collect the 15 heroic icons. And you got Takeru trying to fight for his life. So, again, you needed, even if we didn't, at that time in the show, we really didn't understand, like, the backstory and history of Takeru and Makoto, was you could have put any character in that Spectre spot and gave them any kind of backstory you wanted to, but that first leg of the show needed that conflict to work plot-wise, because it couldn't just be Takeru just running around against Saionji, who over here doing his own thing. No, he needed somebody to fight. He needed somebody to run against and ultimately run past to collect the 15 heroic icons first. And of course, because he is a rider, and that was the case you needed that heel face turn. It was important. I'll sit here and wonder, is that because I think when I think about how that first leg of the show worked, was when I initially thought that the whole 99 days thing was going to like stretch out over the whole show, I did wonder, because of my misunderstanding of how icons work, is I thought that at some point that if Kamen didn't become a human again, that I thought that Kamen was probably going to die and that icon would have turned into some power up for Spectre. But understanding how those type of icons work versus the heroic icons, I can see why it didn't. But I just wanted to bring it up because I always thought that was going to be a thing that happened. Speaking of things that happened, was at some point, and we're still talking about the first leg of the show here, is that Takeru collects all the MacGuffins. Saionji, who was a great villain, was a great villain because it's like, if the show would have stretched out the whole time, is that even though Saionji ended up getting sucked into the grid, I never saw or never talked about again in a way that was relevant in any way, was he probably would have got offed no matter what. It's like, if you would have had Saionji as the villain from the beginning to the end, he would have got off near the end. You probably would have, in most rider show senses, you probably would have got off like right around the time that he probably would have been the first victim of the rider's final power-up. He is that level of villain. Like, you around long enough to see things happen, but you the first one to get a taste of this new power. That you sit up here this whole time, and it's like, you think that at this point, it's time for me to take over. Saionji would have been that villain. He would have been the villain who is the demo, the person who gets walked out there, ooh, I got this new superpower. That I'm finna show you all the powers and get done in. He was that type of villain. But I have to say that if we're going to talk about Saionji real quick, he was an interesting villain because he went in all in for himself. He was the whole reason why all that bad shit happened to Makoto and Kamen. All of that stuff broke up the squad, everything. That he was that even though that that we really didn't learn a lot about him till it was time for the show to reveal it, is that him and Alan, they were an interesting combo. They were an interesting combo of villains because again, for a long time, it's like Alain was this mysterious little kid walking around drawing eyes all over the city. And you had Sahaji, whose only goal was to collect the 15 heroic icons to do God knows what. But then when he finally collected all 15, and he tried, it sucked him into the great eye, and it left it right for Takeru. And what did he do? He took the 15 heroic MacGuffins and wished for Kanen's life. So the only chance you had to get yourself back to life to using the 15 MacGuffins, you waste that wish not on yourself, but on your homeboy sister. It was at this point that I kind of was like, huh? Like, why is this happening? Because again, I'm like, it was at this point I didn't expect them to collect the 15 heroic icons so soon. It's like, I didn't think it was going to happen, but when it finally did, it was like, well, what the show going to do now? It's like, the things that were supposed to bring him back to life are no longer on the table, technically, quote unquote, quote, is that the greatest option select in history happened. His daddy, I can't let you do this. You've made this great sacrifice. So he turns his soul into a power-up and resets the boy's clock. That was the dumbest, smartest thing. I was like, really? This is your answer. You're going to take the movie power-up and you're going to repurpose it. You're going to repurpose it for the TV show and say, well, we really didn't think this whole 99-day thing through, but we need to give you a power-up. So we're going to give you a power-up and a time reset and to make sure it never happens again. But then my problem with time during that first 99-day cycle was Dave was just disappearing off the clock. I remember it was a jump between one episode to the next where 3 weeks disappeared. And it was at that point that I kind of understood that some screw is going to happen with the time thing, because in between you doing stuff, 3 weeks just disappearing. It's just like, really now? You don't say 3 weeks. Not one, not two, but 3 weeks off the man's clock disappearing. It's just like, okay, I guess. So that was the first leg. It's like he got the power of Tokon Boost. He used it and he was able to find new icons and stuff like that. And that was the first leg. That was the first leg of the show. And I honestly think that the dynamics that they were building for the first leg of the show could have been a show all unto itself if they would have built upon that. But they kind of didn't. Because it was at this point Alain Sector getting his ass whooped in the whole technical, you're fucking up my plan sort of way. So he decides that I'm going to take the fight in my own hands and does the greatest thing ever. He introduces the world to the Mega U-Loader. Mega U-Load. I'm like, yo, I will say this since we are talking about this right now. The belt sounds in this season were sick. Dive too deep. Put it on, get it up. Put it on, get it up. Come on, let's go. I'm like, yes. I have really been considering, there have been a couple of drivers I've always wanted to buy. I've always wanted the double driver. The double driver was always one that I really wanted because I like the Gaia memories. I really was feeling those, and I remember a couple of years ago they were selling the complete DX set of the Gaia memories of both the T1 and the T2 versions and stuff like that. I always wanted a shift car changer. I always wanted one of those because I really like the dynamic of the shift car. But yo, the Mega U-Loader, the Ghost drivers, yo, I'm like, those bell sounds are sick. I want one just to sit up here. I just like that action of slapping it in there and then pulling it up and then pulling the switch. I think that's kind of hot. But like I said, it was at this point where the show started to take a weird turn. A very, very weird turn. Where now Alan has the Mega U that he can turn into Necrom, and they sit up here and they sit up here at this point and walk Takeru and Makoto into what wrestling fans would call a squash match, because I'm sitting up here wondering, like, Takeru just got his daddy's power up at this point, so he should be able to whoop anything walking, but because it is a power up in the sense where it's not the power up, of course he walks out there and get him and Makoto walk out there and they get smashed by Necrom. Walk out there and get smashed. They walk out there and get smashed. But then you also understand that we are setting up for another magical heel face turn here, because the way that at this point that the show was presenting Alain in a way that they were throwing heel face turn at you, because it was at this point like maybe 2 or 3 episodes after Necrom was introduced, was they start showing commercials, was the heroic legend of Alain coming soon on Blu-ray or whatever, and it's like, you won't even let the show do the heel face turn. You telling me that he finna become a hero. You telling me this stuff. And I will take the time and say that those, from all the ones that I've seen, they're excellently done, and the way that they work is that they flow into the plot. Like, this is the stuff that was happening while this was happening. So it's supplementary. You don't need to watch it if you don't want to. The same result will happen no matter what. But if you want that little extra, it's right here. If you want that little extra about what's going on with this kid, and it's like, it told an interesting story, because what it ultimately did was it brought the heel face turn all the way, because the character who was responsible for the final like 90 degrees of that turn was heavily involved in the heroic legend of Alain, and that character, of course, being Grandma Fumi, may she rest in peace, is that I didn't get that part of it. I don't get why a character had to be sacrificed for this character's heel face turn. I don't get it. It's like, I understand, like, in hindsight, like, how it was supposed to work, because for those that don't know, is that Necrom used to siphon off of like the like whatever they call the gamma that were like the foot soldiers or whatever. He would be able to absorb their power, and it was what fueled him. And for a minute, it's like after his his most heel face turn was he couldn't use the Necrom suit anymore, because it was at this point that this is like honestly where the show took a turn and never looked back. Was they killed Adonis. They killed him. You know what I'm saying? Well, Ado killed him, because it's like he was driven insane about his daddy was sitting up here going back on his ideals and understanding that maybe the whole Gamma World thing wasn't the best idea in the world, and he was killed for it. He was killed by his own son. His own son, because it's like, and the show really gets into this later, into this thing we're going to talk about the 3 R's, and we'll get into I'll explain what that means when I get into like talking about the characters and stuff. But it was at this point was Necrom was turning around, whooping ass, then getting his ass beat, and it's like, we're homies now, but we homies on the same side, because my own brother is staging a coup d'etat now, so we need to do something about this, because I don't know, my brother here unstable, so let's go get this fool. So they go to the Gamma World, and they go get him. And well, Alan's dad eats it, Alias somewhere, and we'll talk about like how little they use her, and Ado then took over. So it was at this point was like, yo, my daddy dead, I gotta fight against my brother. But again, we are still at a point where he's good, but he hasn't taken that full turn. It was the episode, like I said, when Grandma Fumi died, is when he put on that non-fitting green sweater, and it was like, yeah, it's on now. It's like, it's on now. Is that as a character, he needed that arc, but I feel that it was a little over dramatized for my taste. Just a little, just over dramatized, just a little bit. That whole heel face turn was just a little too much for me. For me. And once we had that, we had the three hero riders, and we have a dynamic. Here's the problem that I have with this show at this point going forward. Okay, let's remember something. Sanji, he was a decent B tier villain or whatever. Like, you need him because you need Takeru to get over this first arc to really introduce the person who is allegedly responsible for all of his problems of because because it was initially thought that I thought that too, that the story was leaning over that it was Sanji's fault that Takeru's dad was killed, that Makoto and Kamen was sucked into the Great Eye, and all this so crazy shit that happened. He got his just desserts, was killed. And it's like, you had Alan come over, and he was supposed to be ultimately the new villain, and it's like, you see that the heel face turn is coming, because it ain't no way that either they gonna let they gonna let a power like Necron sit over there on the bad guy side for the rest of the series. That either that belt is gonna be destroyed or that belt would be passed to somebody else if Alan eats it, which didn't happen. His dad is killed, we know that. Grandma Fumi dies, full heel face turn complete. Here's now where we have a problem. This point here, this is where we have a problem. You have no compelling villains left. And that was what the show died on. The show had no compelling villains. Adol was not a compelling villain. Igor wasn't either. Steve Bill's Jobs man, he was sitting up here being a fake villain. You really weren't sure what side Edith was actually on yet. So your whole villain scheme for the rest of this show is going to hang on Adol. Guess what? Adol was a bad villain, and it's why the back half of the show fell apart, because he was a bad villain. Igor was a bad villain. They were bad villains, and the show was bad because the show fell apart because they sucked as opposition. Because you want to take 2 seconds to talk about opposition that you cared about. Heart, Brain, and Medic. Those were villains that I felt for, villains that had me engaged with the conflict. Adol failed at that. Adol failed. He failed as a villain. I'm sorry. I can't even, there isn't anything redeeming about this guy as a villain. Now, if you would have gave him a heel face turn before whatever happened at the end happened to him, maybe. And even then, you get that power for a couple of episodes, maybe, before he bites it for real, because the show might need that. Adol wasn't a compelling villain at all. It's like, and then once you realize Adol isn't a compelling villain and Igor sucks, it's like at this point, just skipping around the plot is, you give Makoto Deep Spectre. And this is after Ghost gets grateful. So at this point, we're introducing more toys, and that's semi-important here. But it was at this point you had the Makoto doppelganger running around, and you got Adol, and you got the Gamazers. None of this shit was interesting at all. None of that side of the plot was interesting because they were uninteresting villains. It's like, hell, if we gonna talk about it, when Elia turned into Dark Necron P, I thought she was finna do something. Hell, I thought when they introduced her that maybe she would have been the one to off Adol, and she would have been the show that she would have been the villain that carried the rest of the show. Even though they didn't really show that in her and all, I thought that was gonna be like a heel turn for her. Nope. She sat there, turned into Pink Necron once, got her ass kicked by a grandmother, got mind fucked by her brother, and did nothing for the rest of the show. You want people sitting up here wondering why Ghost didn't work? Here's reason number 300. The villain sucked. There was no There was no reason. It was like no reason in there. It's just that we fight for the sake of fighting. And you could sit up here and say Takeru, Makoto, and Allen were fighting a brick wall, and that would be as good as you get because Ada was a bad villain. He was a bad lead villain. He should have never been the villain. The Makoto doppelganger stuff, even with the turn they took with it toward the end, did nothing. Igor, Steven Bills, nothing villains, just nothing villains. Edith, even ultimately we gonna get into, even though his full face turn came near the end with that, and it's like that was the other problem. When the truth was revealed about who Edith was, is that we as the show, watchers, we understood that they was sitting up here talking about they ain't the same person, but we knew that Edith and Cindy, they were the same person. We knew this information. But when the show finally decided to give you a 3-minute history lesson as to why, it was kind of like, who cares at this point? He been playing both sides this whole time. He pitted Takeru against Makoto. He pitted the good guys against the bad guys. He was playing both ends of the story because he was trying to fix the mistake of him and his homie. And it's like when the show finally got to the reveal about the how and the why, it didn't have any impact because at this point you aren't married to any of this because you have non-compelling villains in a story that's non-compelling because you blew your load the first time. When they reset the time on Takeru, it was like at that point, honestly, I was done with the plot. It's like the whole show that you were basing this off of is collect these MacGuffins. You want me to collect the MacGuffins again? This is a new game plus for that ass? Collect the MacGuffins again? No, thank you. I reset the time on him because you're trying to rush to get these toys sold. And it's just like, even in that, even with the end game being that the reason why there was a final episode before the final episode was because there were 2 Deep Spectre icons, it's like, really? Like, okay. No impact. None of the plot impact. After Takeru got Tokon Boost, the show fell apart. Even trying to base Allen's heel face turn on that, the show's plot fell apart. He got grateful, and because it was a power up right there at that point, you watch right enough to know in a couple episodes this is a toy, and you know this ain't gonna matter. This ain't gonna ride to the end game. Even though the show, and I will admit, the show tried to address that. The show tried to address that, especially when it came to him being like, even though I have this power of infinity, the heroic icons, they see me through everything, and they matter. Like heroic icons' lives matter or some shit. I don't know. Because the show needed to remind you there were toys. Not that Takeru needed it for plot purposes, but the show needs to remind you there were toys to sell. I don't get it. Well, wait, I do. Because this is a TV show marketed to kids to get their mommy and daddy to buy them toys they may or may not need. Okay, see, there we go. Bringing myself back down to earth. The point that I'm making, this show had what it took to be a great show, especially in the beginning with the way they were setting up. The show at some point just imploded on itself. That it was a good show, it was a good watch, but I wasn't like, tuning into the show every week. It's like at some point watching Ghost was a chore because I watch Rider, and it's like if I start something, I'm gonna finish it. I know that sounds weird coming from me, but when I start something, I'll finish it. I don't know when, but I will at some point. You know what I'm saying? It was like watching Ghost was a chore. Because I remember, and now because I'm going to bring him up again, I remember when Brain died, when Medic died. Those were emotional moments for me. That final showdown between Hardish and Nosuke, that got me. Takeru went out there and killed Ada. Okay, so when you don't build compelling villains for the compelling story everything just falls flat, and the back end of Ghost fell flat. After Alan took his heel face turn, the show took a dive. It was like, and so, it's like the thing is, and I will admit, even though the show took a dive on that end, is that the character still grew in the plot, but the impact of the show was lost. And once you lose that, you can't get that back. So again, and I'm going to repeat this 3 or 4 more times. At least I hope I don't have to, but I might. Ghost had what it took to be one of them echelon level shows. And it was like, after Tokon Booth, after the heel face turn, the show fell flat. The show fell flat. It's a good show. It's a good show, but it's a good show if you want to sit there and watch it. And if you get compelled by the plot, understand that at some point the show gonna fall flat for you. But again, like I said at the beginning, is that we don't have all the pieces. So maybe they're gonna be the movie, the Spectre movie might pick up the pieces of the show and might make something. It might make something relevant, like what the Gone movies did. The Gone movie sat up here and they filled in the minutia of this world, the before and the after of the whole event. It's the feeling that I have that the Mock and Hart movies are going to do and fill the minutia. I just hope the Spectre movie can do the same thing, because this show needs a Band-Aid. And I'm being nice, the show needs a Band-Aid because I was into the premise. I was into the plot in the beginning. The show was amazing, and it's like I was in it because it was all these mysteries and all these questions, and we still have unanswered questions. So again, like I said, the show fell super flat, super flat. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I don't really know like what really to say at this point, but I'm saying that is that it's a good show that had what it took to be great, but didn't live up to that potential. Yo, before we get out of here, I do really want to get into talking about the characters a bit more that I didn't get to talk about at all, because there are something special there. Is that I really want to just quickly, I want to get into like some of the low tier guys, like mainly Shibuya and Naruto, like because they were there. It's like Shibuya, he got a little bit of revelation about what his home life was about when they talked about how his mother and his father met and why his mommy built a ramen noodle shop. Naruto didn't get no character development. He was there sitting up here like, yo, you seen this dude? That's what he did the whole show. Yo, you seen homeboy? Yo, we'll stay back while y'all go over here and go, actually do something. That's all they did. They were cool characters, and it is what it was with that. Let's see. You know what? Let's just quickly, because I gave him like 10 minutes. We'll just talk about Alan real quick. It's like, yo, like I talked about earlier, is that his heel face turn was the start of the downturn of the show, because once he left the villain side, there was no compelling villains left. Is that a really asshole Alan would have made a great villain for the show to ride on. A really great asshole, because a really great asshole Alan probably would have made the show better. Because, let me see. Z in Tokuja, he probably would have been like a Z in Tokuja. For real, like, Alan could have been like a Z in Tokuja type of villain, though, and that would have been hot, because those clashes, that if that was the type of dynamic that it was going to be if Alan would have stayed on the evil side, those clashes between him and Takaru, that shit would have been hot. That shit would have been hot. I'm just saying, it's that. Again, it's a shame that Grandma Fumi got sacrificed for plot relevance and plot development for the character. Because I love takoyaki balls too. And it's like, and the thing was, is that it was kind of cool that they, attributed his like of takoyaki balls to all the stuff that Sayanji had taunted him with the whole time when you get into the backstory and stuff. So it's like, it's not like the show didn't have its bright spots, but Alan was a bright spot, and no matter what, and it's like they could have done a whole lot with the character, but what they decided to do with the character was fine, because something that I just remembered that I wanted to say real quick, that when it came to like the Mega U-Loader, it's like, you know what it says when he finished transforming? Crush the Invader. Is that I didn't really like catch on to that like near the end of the show. Like Crush the Invader. And then you understood what that meant. That initially he was trying to stop Takeru and Makoto from coming over to the Gamma world and doing what they doing. But then now he's crushing the invaders to the human world because now this is a world he wants to protect. That, I'm going to be honest, he was probably one of the most realized characters in the show. And you sit up here and you wonder why, like a character we finna get into like Makoto, why he didn't get that type of love. But, you know, Alan was an amazing character. And it's like you could have wrote a show around him easily. No matter on what side you want to write around, like you could have wrote a show around him, be either being a hero or a villain. So he was like, to me personally, he was a standout of the show. Just letting you know, there is one other standout character, and we're gonna get to them. Let me see. Let's talk Makoto and Kamen real quick. Let's talk them because let's just push Kamen in the middle of the street. Because let's just be honest, the show didn't need her. The show did not need Kamen. She in herself was a plot MacGuffin because you needed a reason for Makoto to fight Takeru. Takeru wastes his wish on that waste of space, and all she did was Oni-chan, Alain-sama. I'm like, yo, they was pushing that Alain fucking cannon ship hella hard, son. And Alan was like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm a human. What is a dick? I don't even know how it works. Seriously. Canon was a waste of space. It's like that one episode where the Billy the Kid icon took over for some comic relief, and we're going to talk about the heroic icons in a second, but other than that, she didn't really do anything noteworthy other than say, Oni-chan, Alain-sama. That's all the girl did. Poor girl. She probably looking in the mirror like, she like, Barrel, I got paid. Because she got paid all right to say 2 lines. Oni-chan. That's all she did. And then that interaction with QB, she didn't do nothing other than that. Poor Makoto. Makoto had everything that it took to be a real fucking badass. And they initially wrote him like, yo, he was the swag buster. He could have been the swag buster. And he was when he first appeared on the scene. It's a blue ghost. Who is this dude? Who this nigga here? Who is he? Who is this guy? Let me know. Let me know who's that guy. Who is this dude? They anchored him to Kamen. That fucked this character. He's like, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to save my sister. So I'm gonna beat up my best friend. But it's like, I can't hate on the resolve though. That his resolve was, it's you and me, that my sister's more important than anything, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. I can respect the resolve. The problem was, his heel face turn was attributed to someone else giving up their chance at life, and then his full face turn came at that point. And then after that, Makoto, the character, fell apart. His character fell completely apart. It was like, and we'll get into her, is that for a second, the show was like, hinting at something between Akari and Makoto, but they never did anything with it. And it was just a notice, I don't know, because Akari's weird when it comes to which of the boys that she like, Makoto or Takeru, but we'll get into that when we talk about her. But again, like I said, once the canon anchor was removed from his neck, Makoto didn't really do anything. He got the best icon in the show, though. Dive too deep. Man, D-Spectre. My nigga, though. I love D-Spectre. I love the look, everything about D-Spectre. D-Spectre. Yeah. Man, yo. Yeah, D-Spectre, yo. I'm like... But the thing was is that, and then that was leading into the whole Makoto doppelganger thing that really didn't do anything. But even at the end, when the Makoto doppelganger thing kind of meant something, it meant nothing, because at that point the show had fell flat. The plot involving the doppelganger fell flat. You really didn't care about Makoto all too much, even though, man, he did his thing. I'm not gonna lie, he did his thing. There were episodes where Takeru was falling the fuck apart and Makoto was standing strong as fuck. I will admit that. But it was at this point the show was like crumbling around itself. So it's like characters were even with all this old dumb shit happening around and with the plot falling around themselves, the characters still had shining character moments. And Makoto was a character who kept having character moments, but he could have been a better character. He could have been a character that you could have wrote a series around if you wanted to. You could have changed the plot a little bit, MacGuffins be damned, and still had a hot show out of him. You still could have done that. It's like when you come to the two characters who I think have the most growth, it's Onari and Akari, because both of them, they had the most growth because they were the characters you really saw the most and were two of the characters that if you wanted to, you could really like take a second and like look at the show through their eyes, because when it comes to Onari, it's like the show needed him. Because we talked about earlier when we talked about Edith and when we talked about Urison, was because of the show's heavy subject matter. You needed somebody to keep it light. You needed a character like Onari to keep it light, and he did that. He brought comic moments when the show needed it. Like when the show needed a comic moment, Onari was always there to take the hit, and he did a wonderful well job of it. He's a great character. He had a couple of shining standout moments, you know what I'm saying, and I'm glad that he did. But he did, as a character, he did his job. That actor did a wonderful job bringing Onari to life, and that's really all I can say about the character. Akari, however, there was a lot of dynamics going on with her, because she is the character, you know, that somebody like. Because when you think about it, because I'm finna try, because I want to get what I want to say about Akari right. I want to get this right. So here it is. Akari was the character in the show who had the most growth. And here's why. When you met Akari in episode 1, Akari was a woman who saw the world as tangible. If this isn't tangible, it isn't real. And she believed that way because in her heart and soul, she was a scientist. And she was a great scientist at that, because the show would have been nothing without her. Because I'm like, everybody would have been running around with chickens with their head cut off without her trying to keep grounded. It's like she's the character that outside of Takeru showed growth the most, because it was her who needed to get around and understand that a person she cares deeply about is on the precipice of life and death, existing as a ghost, and she didn't believe for a long while. And when that turn came for her, when she learned to understand that there's more to the world than tangibility, was when her character evolved. And the show became better for it, because the show needed her to grow. Because, again, the show, you'd have been kicking with their head cutting off if it wasn't for her in the lab with the lab coat, cooking work. She made the little shirt, Nui gun and stuff like that. She did work. It's like they were able to do things in that show they wouldn't have been able to do without her and her growth, and ultimately what it did was it made her a better person. It made her a better scientist, and that's what you want from a character. You want to see that level of growth from a character, and Akari brought it. Akari brought that growth, and all I can do, she's one of the few characters in the show that I can definitely applaud, because again, she's the character who, you look at episode 1 and episode 50, those are two different people. So she was an amazing character, and I'm glad I was able to give it its time, you know what I'm saying, to give her something. Takeru Tenkuji. Here's the thing. I have made the mistake again by reading what people thought about this character at the end, but here is the truth, verbatim as it is. The show that we spent 50 episodes watching needed a Takeru Tenkuji. It needed a Takeru Tenkuji. It needed a character who, and I'm finna say this, who started from the bottom, and I mean the bottom. His mama dead. The death of his father still weighs on his soul. All of these things. All of it. And speaking of the death of his father, I do need to say this because I'm trying to limit what I say about Adel. I still don't believe that they gave Adel that kill. I'm like, that was the other thing. That was the thing that sent me over the fucking edge. Like, what? Like, you trying to make a compelling villain out this dude by making him the one that ended fucking Ryu's death. I'm like, yeah. See, you hear the disgust in my voice, but yeah, I just remembered that. Like, yeah, when I was talking about Ryu, they gave that death to Adel. I'm like, I understand why you would do that, why you would give that to the character who would allegedly become your final villain, but you know, whatever. And we're going to get into that in my closing remark. But back to Takeru, though. Like I said, you needed a character like him to tell a story because first he started from the bottom. He was in a very horrible, fucked up place. No lie. As a character he was, but surprisingly enough, getting murdered by those Gamma changed his life because it gave him an opportunity to understand why life was so important, why lives matter, what humans are like. He learned about himself by learning about others. And that growth changed him as a person. It evolved him as a hero. And that's all you can really say, is that the show needed a character to be able to touch those hearts, which would also probably explain why the theme song is very Naruto Boruto sounding like. Y'all, you thought I wasn't going to get on that? Yeah, did that. Anyway, the show needed a character who could grow with the show, who could grow with his powers, who could be the character who you could look at and believe in because his friends believed in him, and that became a little grating toward the end because when Takeru was falling apart, is that all his friends could say was, Dr. Bayo, believe it. That's what they did. But regardless, the show needed a Takeru to tell its story. It needed a character to show growth as a person and as a hero. And the show successfully did that with Takeru. And I have really nothing else to say. Is that, yeah, Takeru, there was some weak moments there. And I will admit that. But the show needed Takeru Tenkuji. Because the show would be a whole different show. It wouldn't be Kamen Rider Ghost without him. Because you needed a character who could grow from his experiences to be a better hero and a better person. And the show did that. Because when I think about it, is that when I think about everything that happened, a lot of the characters in this show got what I like to call the 3 R's of rebirth, redemption, and realization. And not necessarily in order, because it's more of the backwards order of realization, redemption, and rebirth. Because again, Makoto was a character who got a dose of the 3 R's. The realization of understanding that sacrifice is important, but what is it you're sacrificing for? He realized that. And then he made his heel face turn and had a redemption and had a rebirth as a character on the side of good. The same for Alan, even though the show beat you over the head with it. It beat you over the head with it. Edith got a dose too, especially when they had to sit up here and take 5 minutes to explain what he was doing. Was he had a realization like way back earlier in the season, especially when it came to the point when Makoto got Deep Spectre. When Makoto got Deep Spectre, I think that's where the show took a turn, because it really showed that, that I understand that maybe what I was doing was right, but maybe how I was doing it might have been a little wrong. And I think that was like episode like 43 was when when that comic relief happened, when they found out who he really was, and then he had that redemption and rebirth. Hell, even for the non-compelling villain Adel, he got a dose of the 3 R's. All it took was him getting his ass whooped by Takeru a couple of times, and then he walked out there and just jobbed at the end. He just walked out there. He just walked out there weak as fuck and just jobbed. He just walked out there and just got jobbed out. He was like, "I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, sister. I'm fading away." Wait. He even got the 3 yards. I'm like, Igor got it before he bit it. You know what I'm saying? Javert, he got some at the end of the show, so it should be interesting in the movie to see what they do with him and stuff like that. But I will say this. Ghost was a good show that had what it took to be greater than it ended up being, but it was a shame that when they strapped the chip on Adol, dog, show fell apart because he just wasn't a compelling villain. If they would have wrote Adol to be a villain, then maybe. Because at first, for real, I really thought that Adol could have been a villain that carried the show, and he just wasn't. The Gamazers, that was weak. Like I said, the Makoto doppelganger stuff was weak. Even what they did with it at the very end with that little twist, weak. W-E-A-K, weak. Weak. That's what it was. Oh, speaking of weak things, before we wrap this up, you want to know what was W-A-C-K-K-K? Want to know what was whack? That Gozu-Oja crossover. Whackness in the highest degree. Especially when you look at what Ninja Cross Drive did, even though Kiriko didn't do the Ninja dance, and how great Tokuja versus Gaim was. That little Tokuja Cross Gaim joint, how cool that was. It even had a little plot relevance in it. It's like, go show up, help him whoop a villain. Next 20 minutes or so later in the other show, Yamato show up and they fight a villain together. That shit was whack. There was no interaction between them. Hell, it's like when I talked about the Gokaiger versus Uoja crossover, it was like they had that little 3 or 4 minutes in the house, and then it wasn't nothing because they just ran into a fight afterwards. And I'm just sitting up here like, I don't know, but that crossover with Uoja was whack as fuck, and I'm saying it. I'm just saying that crossover was whack. I have hope for whatever, because it's like you got to think that because it's a superhero that superhero ties in, the superhero ties in movies got to go dumb because it's 40th anniversaries here, 45th anniversaries there, and stuff like that. And I don't know, but X-A is up next. You know what I'm saying? And it's like that show. I like what I see so far. You know what I'm saying? It's like, hopefully, man, I'm probably going to sit down and do my yearly ritual of watching the Raw and seeing what the show is about without knowing. Because I know a little Japanese. I know enough to get around, but not enough to sit up here and understand a 24-minute TV show. I'm not going to lie. But we're going to see how much I can gain from that. Understand what the show is trying to do, what the show is about. And then I'm going to watch a sub. And then we'll be back here talking about this stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm sitting up here, and I'm thinking about like Rider Revolution, and that's weird to really think about now. Is like Rider Revolution. I think that's gonna be a good game. I really think that's gonna be a game that I'm going to enjoy the hell out of. Important. I'm hoping to get a English version and get an English version in Asia. That'd be nice. I'm like, when it comes to X8 and thinking about its premise, which is one of the reasons why I'm excited to watch it. I do wonder what they are going to do outside of Rider Revolution this year. Because I know, let me be for real, my time with Climax Heroes is done. I have done everything that I wanted to do. There were a couple of characters that I wanted to take a look at, but if I decide I want to, I will. But I think that I have accomplished what it was accomplished, and I've laid out a Bible about this game that I hope that what people take away from what I did with that was everything is not what it is at face value. That's why on this same channel there is a look at what they were trying to do with a game like Girl Fight, because that game has some thought put into it, and it's just at my point of, putting out those videos was A, because I was raging against the machine, and B, to show that, everything isn't what it seems on the surface. There were things there that made it a great game, but a lot of things that made it busted because it was a fan service fighter, and it was what it was. I want another Climax Heroes game. Bat Ride War games, they are wonderful. I play the hell out of them, but I'm ready for another. I'm ready. I think we do for a reboot of it. I think because it's been a while, because what? Wizard was the last game. That was the last game that ended it. Wizard, Game, Drive, Ghost, X8. Yeah, we about to. We about to. So, I've been holding you hostage long enough. Been holding you hostage long enough. I just want to thank you for kicking it with your boy. I got some other stuff coming out this weekend. You know what I'm saying? Supposed to be looking at something. Of course, when I actually get a sub of that first episode of XA, we'll be back to talk about my initial thoughts about that. Me and Jay have the Falling Into the Fall season video coming this weekend. Not this weekend, but next weekend, actually. So be watching out for that. I took 4 minutes and talked about how I'm the leader of the Carry ship and the Superhero Fight Club 2.0. So if you want to hear about my love for the greatest ship since Kurosami, which is Carry, by the way, because I am the leader of the Carry ship, you can listen to that. You should go watch Superhero Fight Club 2.0. If you are interested in those CW superhero shows, you should watch that. It's an amazing watch. But that's it for me. That's it for me. The Cool will be out whenever the Cool is out. All that good stuff. I'm just like, yo, I want to thank you, Ghost. It was a good show. It could have been better. Is that, I just didn't have that same feel that I had with like other Rider shows, that when it was over, that I had the Rider tears when that final Rider kick, because it was like, it's that realization that that things are done. But it's like, I didn't have like an attachment, as much of attachment to the show as I've had with past shows. And and when a show doesn't have that, I don't know what to say. It's like the show had it, but it's like that back end fell apart. The back end of the show with Ada was a bad villain and all that stuff, the back end of the show just fell apart. It's a good show that had what it took to be great. It just needed a little bit more love and care. But it was a great show. I'm proud of the growth that I got an opportunity to spend a year watching. I am proud of that. As a fan, it's a good show, but it had what it took to be a great show, and it just fell a bit short. And it happens sometimes. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get out of here. I've been holding y'all hostage long enough. I don't even know how long this video is. Ooh-wee, now I know how long this video is. Let's just turn that off. I just saw how long I've been talking. I didn't know it was that long. But even a show like Ghost deserves this amount of time being talked about, its plot and everything. But I'm glad I got a chance and an opportunity to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, man. Yo, X8 is up next. Ghost, thank you for your service this year. Let's hope G.O.D can make another right turn, because we'll talk about that when G.O.D is over. How about that? But you know what it is. It's the one and the only, the triple, the G.O.D. And this has been another episode of Triple the Guy Speaks On. And with that, I'll holler at you guys next time, man. Peace out.